Hi there. Welcome to Facebook Live, Sunday afternoon live here at AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey. And I thought today what I would do is put on my Rocketry hat. I have my Estes Rockets hat here. Estes Rockets, model rockets. And I'm not going to wear this hat while we do the video, but Estes Rockets. That's the brand, the major brand of model rockets that we carry here at AAA Hobbies. And since the weather's starting to break, it's getting a little bit warmer, I thought we'd talk about a really great outdoor hobby. I love model rockets. I've done model rockets since I was 6 years old, 8 years old when I was in the Scouts. And Estes model rockets came about because kids and young adults were experimenting with propulsion and rockets back in the heyday when the space race was going on in the 50s, 60s. And people were getting hurt because they were building homemade rockets and playing around with chemicals to make propulsion or propellant. And Estes came along and decided to make everything safer, which is really one of the most important aspects of buying model rockets from us, from a company like Estes that's been doing it for a long time. They've developed a system where you can build your rockets, buy your engines, get a launch pad, go out, launch them safely. No one gets hurt. And that's really important. I mean, it's not like you're really going to get hurt, but if you don't follow the procedures and do it safely, there is always a chance that something could go wrong. So when folks come into the store and they ask about model rockets, basically it's like any other hobby that I have out there. The first question is, what do I need to get started? Well, if you've never done model rockets, and I'm sure I've got, in the audience out there, Rocketeers that have been doing it for years, that know everything about it, I'm kind of gearing this discussion toward beginners, and I do this with most hobbies. I want to make sure everybody understands what they're getting into and what they need to do it. So the first thing I tell people when they come in is if you've never done this, your best bet is to buy a starter outfit. And that goes for any hobby. If you go in, if you're going to get into model trains, you buy a starter set. If you're going to get into model rockets, you buy a starter set. And starter sets are all in a box. Everything's in this box. You got to buy a couple things like glue and some recovery wadding and whatnot and engines to get going. But to build your basic rocket and to get a launch pad and get yourself ready, always look at the starter sets. And if you look at the back of the starter set box, they always show you what's in there. And the starter sets sell, we have different starter sets that have different rockets in them. And usually when you buy a rocket starter set, they set you up with a rocket that's easy to build just to get you started. Because as you progress, and if you look behind me here, you can go from a little tiny Star Hopper rocket here, which is quite small, if you look at it next to the launch pad, all the way up to things like Saturn V's. You're talking about a couple feet long rocket here and everything in between. So in the rocket starter sets, what they do is they give you a rocket that, number one, it's all pre-painted. As you can see, this is the rocket, this is an Alpha 3. And the Alpha 3 is the one that I recommend to most people when they buy a starter set. And what makes the Alpha 3 easy to do is, number one, it's all pre-colored. Red, white, and blue. Very American. It's a very cool rocket. You can see the one I have on the stand here has the decal on it and whatnot. This is the rocket that Estes usually gives you to do, say, a build and take or I forget what they call it. It's a launch thing where I bring people in and we all build the same rocket. And this rocket's pretty easy to build. And one of the reasons it's easy is the fin assembly is plastic and it's all one piece. One of the, I don't want to say it's the hardest, but one of the parts of building rockets that you really have to be careful with, and it takes a little bit of time, is the fin assemblies. When you get into some of the higher end rockets, they come with balsa wood fins, and you have to sand down the balsa wood and pop out the fins and then glue them onto the tube. Make sure they're all aligned straight so that the rocket goes straight up. If your fins are off, rocket's going to go compy-wampus and go everywhere. So the beginner rockets come with the plastic fin assembly, pre-painted, plastic nose cone, and everything you need, the parachute and so forth. So let's see. I'm getting questions. We're here at AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey. If I see some questions, I'll try to answer them. If I don't answer your questions, just post the questions and I'll answer them after I'm done here. I'm all on my own today. So let me see here. Okay, so that's the basic starter set rocket. It's an easy to assemble rocket. Now I have one here that's clear. This is what's called the Phantom rocket. And the reason they call it the Phantom is it's clear. It's a display. In other words, this rocket is for me to show you what's inside the rocket and what makes it go. So if you take a look at this rocket, the engine is in the back. And these are solid propellant engines, solid fuel propellant. And without getting too in-depth, it has propellant, it has a delay charge, and then an ejection charge to shoot the parachute out. And if you notice, when you launch your rocket, the propellant comes out of the back end like a real rocket, obviously. Let me grab my chair here so I can sit down. The delay charge puts out smoke. So when your rocket goes up on the propellant charge, once that burns out, then the delay charge goes off and you see smoke. That gives you the ability to trace where the rocket's going. Because once they get up there, they're like a speck. You can hardly see it. But when the smoke comes out, you'll see it. And then there's a delay between the smoke and the ejection charge. And the ejection charge blows that way toward the front. And it pushes the nose cone off, which pulls the parachute out. And there's a ripcord here that keeps the nose cone from disappearing when you're flying. And like I say, this is the parachute. This Alpha 3 is a parachute recovery. I'll unfold it a little bit here so you can see. This is a parachute recovery rocket. So the parachute will, grab this here, it'll bring the rocket down and float down. The stuff that's behind, this is important. This paper that's inside of here, this isn't regular paper. This is what's called, let me grab the package. This is called recovery wadding. Recovery wadding basically is the protection between the ejection charge and your parachute. Because if you don't have the wadding in there, the ejection charge might melt your parachute and then your rocket's gone. It's going to just go. So recovery wadding is non-flammable. So you can't just put tissue in there or something like that. You really need to get recovery wadding. And this is one of the things you buy separate from the starter set. You get your starter set, tube of glue, recovery wadding, and a box of engines or a packet of rocket engines to go with it. So if you're just getting started, starter set, recovery wadding, glue to build the rocket, and a pack of engines. All right, so that's my Phantom rocket. So motor, recovery wadding, parachute, nose cone. Okay, so we'll put the Phantom rocket over here, get him out of the way. The second important thing about model rockets and doing it safely is the launch pad. And like I say, when you buy a starter set, you get a launch pad with it. The launch pad is basically a tripod that has a launch rod in it, just this metal rod here. It has a blast deflector plate on it down here. That way you don't burn any of the grass or anything under it and start a fire. It deflects the propulsion or the propellant when you launch it. And the launch pad has an adjustment on the bottom so that if it's windy, you can shoot into the wind. You can adjust the angle for your launch. So launch pad, basic rocket, starter set rocket, and most importantly is the launcher. So when you put your rocket on the launch pad, you get your engine, and you put your engine inside of the rocket. Let me take this rocket off of here. And you'll notice this rocket has a smaller engine than it usually does because we shot some out back and we didn't want it to go too high, so we cut down the engine size by about a half. So when you get ready to launch a rocket, what you do is your rocket engines will come with two other items, being the igniter, which are these little, this here, these little nichrome wires. And there's two of them on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rip one of these off. Okay, and that's an igniter. The igniter ignites the propellant in the engine, and you want to do this safely. Some people say, "Oh, I'll put a fuse in there, do it." That's not safe. I mean, this is really the safest way to do it because you can put this in here, hook it up to your launcher, go back 15 feet, and then ignite the engine. So what you do with these is you put them, or you insert them into the engine, okay? And then you basically bend it and tape it on the side. And then, need 2 hands here, 4 hands really. These little plugs, let me show you these. These little plugs come with the engines. So what you do is you put your igniter into the engine, then you take this little plug and you plug the igniter into the engine like this. Move that. So as you can see, I have my igniter in there, the plug is holding the igniter in, and I have 2 wires coming off of that. So what I do is I take my rocket that has the igniter plugged into the engine, I put it back onto the launch rod, then what you do is you take the launch system, and I'm going to undo this, have it wrapped up. So we're here at AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey. We're talking about model rockets today. If you have any questions, just post them here. Post them to me. I'll answer any questions you have. Come on into the store. All right. So as you can see, this is a really long wire. This is 15 feet. That's the amount of distance you want to get from the launch pad when you launch a rocket. Now, there's 2 alligator clips on the launcher. Okay, that's the launcher. These are the alligator clips on the end of the wire. So what I do is I take these 2 alligator clips and I hook one to each of these 2 wires on the igniter. Okay? Now, you're going to say, well, what if I hit the button by accident? On the launcher itself, there's a little key. We call this the key, the launch key. You always keep the launch key out of the launcher while you're setting up. So once I have my rocket on the pad and I've hooked the 2 alligator clips up to the igniter, then I step back 15 feet and I take the launch key and put it into the little hole here where the key goes. And when I'm ready to launch, I press down on that. Nope. Oh, the light bulbs. There. Well, you press down on that and the light comes on, and then you press your launch button and the rocket will go off. So this little launch key is a protection, or it's a stop key so that you don't accidentally launch your rocket. I'm surprised that light bulb didn't go on. So we're here at AAA Hobbies. We're talking about model rockets. Batteries might be dead in here. So, but it's a good thing because I don't want to launch a rocket inside of the store here. That could be bad. I'd lose my job. So for safety's sake, always make sure you're working with a launch pad, an igniter, or a launch system that'll ignite the igniter, and stay 15 feet back from the rocket. That's basically it. So a lot of people, the next question I always get is, what are the powers? What do the different power things mean? Like engine size. There's different size motors for different size rockets. These little tiny rockets like this, and this one's pretty cool because this is what's called a streamer recovery. In other words, instead of a parachute, this has a streamer in it, and the streamer guides the rocket down when it comes down. And you say, well, why doesn't it have a parachute? Because this rocket is so small that with a parachute, it would probably disappear. It would just keep floating away. So the little tiny rockets come down on streamer recovery. And the reason I pulled this little rocket here is to show you the size of the engine that goes in it. This is a quarter-A rocket engine. You can see it's pretty small. It goes into a small rocket like this. Whoop, dropped it. This will go in. I have to take off the end of this rocket to put it in. But you take your end off, you insert your rocket engine, and put this guy back on. So that's the smallest rocket motor size, is quarter A. And the way the size of the motors works, or the way they label them, is you go from quarter A to half A to B, C, D. There are larger ones than D. There are E, F, and G engines. We don't carry those. I think you have to have a special license to sell the larger rocket engines, but the largest ones we sell are D-size rockets, which are plenty for big rockets. And the way, and I'm going to turn this here and get to my whiteboard so I can kind of explain what the different size rocket engines mean. So if I'm shooting rockets, the delineation of A, B, C, D refers to power or newtons. They measure them in newtons, and I'm not a scientist, so don't ask me what a newton is, but it's basically a descriptor for the power of the engine. So the way these rocket engines work is that they double in power with each step. So in other words, a quarter A engine is where you start. A half engine or a half A engine is twice as powerful as a quarter A. And then you go to an A, which is twice as powerful as a half A. And then you double that to a B, double it to a C, double it to a D. So each step, you double the power of the engine. And then there's descriptions afterwards, like A, 8, 3, B, 6, 4, C, 6, 5. What these numbers mean is this is the power, the A. The second number is the thrust. So in other words, the higher the number, the more thrust the engine will have. And you can think about that like your car's gas pedal. A 0 would be just kind of touching the gas pedal and having the car creep up to a speed. When you get up to a 10, that's like pressing down the gas pedal and boom, you're gone. And the thrust has to do with, say you have a windy day. You want to have more thrust on your motor because you're flying up into the wind and you want it to go fast. If you go slow with a lower thrust engine, you'll have a tendency to drift off because of the wind. So A is the power. The second number, B or 8, is the thrust. In other words, how fast the engine reaches that maximum power. And then the third number is the delay in seconds until the chute comes out. So if I have an A83 engine, I have an A-powered engine that has a thrust value of 8, which is pretty high because it's usually 0 to 10, and then the 3-second delay until the parachute comes out after the engine finishes burning. So the engine will burn all the way up, then you'll have 3 seconds, and then the parachute will come out. So that's basically how the numbering and lettering system works on rocket engines. Think about it as power, thrust, and delay. And your different, let me turn this back here. Your different rockets will have different size motors, and usually, Estes is really good about recommending the best motors for your rocket, and it's up to you to determine. Most rocket guys have different engines for their rocket available. If you're shooting one day and it's really windy, you want a higher thrust engine. No wind at all, use a lower thrust engine, and the delay, until the chute comes out. Longer the delay, the higher the rocket's going to go before the parachute comes out. So that's rocket motors. So we've talked about starter sets. We've talked about rocket motors and how they're described on the packaging. And I guess the last thing I want to talk about, and you can see I have a whole lot of rockets back here. I want to talk about some of the accessories that go with rockets. Once you get started, you've shot off your first starter set engine. And the nice thing about the launch pad is the launch pad will work with all the different rockets that Estes makes, or there's other manufacturers that make rockets, but the launch pad is generic. It will work with everyone's rockets. And if you get into some really big rockets, they make heavier duty stands. So if you get into like the big Alpha 5s or Saturn 5s rather and whatnot, you can buy a bigger launch pad, or you can modify this one by getting a bigger blast plate and a longer rod. But my suggestion is if you get into the big heavy rockets, buy yourself a maxi pad, maximum size launch pad. So we've talked about starter sets. We've talked about rocket engines. There are some accessories that are cool that go with rockets. And like I say, if you start to build rockets, it's a lot of fun to design your own. In other words, you can buy, I've got multiple stage rockets where you can shoot off a rocket with 2 engines in it, so it goes up so far, almost like, you know, a Saturn rocket, and it blows off the bottom stage and then ignites the second stage and goes up. There are even 3-stage rockets. There are rockets with gliders on them. I personally like the historic rockets, like the Saturns and the Mercuries and the V2 and all that. They're great kits also. But if you get involved in rockets and you're really into it, and I used to do this myself, they have what's called a designer special. And the designer special kit has tubes in it, it has nose cones in it, it has balsa wood and fin designs, and it has various parts, launch rocket motor lugs and things like that. So you can design your own rockets. And this is a lot of fun. Now, when you get into designing and building your own rockets, there is a tool that's like really useful that you might consider, and it's called a fin alignment guide. And what you see here is, I'm going to hold this up close so you can see it. You can see these are balsa wood fins. So unlike this guy, remember our beginner rocket, the Alpha 3, that has the pre-assembled fins? When you get into designing your own and you get into some of the higher end kits, they have balsa wood fins that you have to cut out and sand and glue to the paper tube, the cardboard tube. Well, this fin alignment guide is really handy because it helps you line up your fins on that tube so that they're glued on straight and your rocket goes straight. Like I said, if your fins aren't glued on straight, you're going to be like wrong way target, and your rocket's going to go, you know, to the next neighborhood and you'll never see it again. And I've done that. So fin alignment guide is a really, really good tool, especially to go along with the designer special kit that has all the different parts for building your own rockets. And believe me, once you shoot some rockets off, you're going to want to build your own. You're going to want to design your own and paint it and so forth. The other tool that I brought out here that I think is really handy and cool is this Ultitrack. The Ultitrack is basically a tool that you use to see how high your rocket goes. And when you shoot a rocket off, it's hard to estimate how high it's going. Well, this tool will help you to gauge the height of your launch. So you can get an idea of, you know, which engines launch highest and so forth. So the Ultitrack is a really great tool. Other than that, like I say, we're here at AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey. We're talking model rockets. Leave me some questions. You know, give me some post your questions to the site, and I'll answer them. Model rocketry is a great hobby. It is very educational. I consider it a STEM hobby: science, technology, engineering, math, because there's a lot of science involved in this, and it's fun. I mean, this is one of the more fun hobbies out there. Once you start building these, trust me, you can't stop. You're going to want to keep building and shooting more rockets off, bigger rockets. And as far as where you launch your rockets, it's recommended, you know, if you go to like the Estes website and you go to the National Model Rocketry site, they list out the distances you need for the different rocket engine types. In other words, you know, if an A rocket's going 100 feet and a B's 200, a C's 300, and so forth, you need a larger area for each step up. And they'll show you, they have charts. I was looking the other day on the SD site. There are charts that show you how large the area should be. As far as picking an area to shoot your rockets, you really need to pick an area that is very large, obviously, and free of houses and power lines and things like that. So I used to go out to parks and, you know, big giant football, baseball type fields, places like that. But always ask permission. If you're going to go out and it's a business, or if it's a public field, it's always best to ask. You can call, you know, the municipal offices and say, is it okay to launch a rocket here, and so forth. You're pretty safe if you stay out of, you know, the public domain. In other words, stay away from buildings and houses and things like that. Go out to a big open field and you should be fine, but always ask permission when you go out to shoot rockets off. I think that's about all I have on model rockets here, other than come on down to the store. I've got plenty of new Estes catalogs, and Estes, like I say, they make so many different rockets. I mean, it's just incredible the choice you have nowadays of rockets to build. And Estes has been in business for a long time. I mean, they've got to be at least 50 years old, and they know what they're talking about. Their product is first class. This one that I have back here I think is really cool. This is the Space Launch System. In other words, this is based on the current NASA launch system that they're using to get satellites and things up in the air. You can see it almost looks like the old booster rockets from the shuttles. And Estes used to have a shuttle rocket out too. The Saturn V's, the Mercuries, just great stuff. So nowadays there's a lot going on with SpaceX and various, the Mars Explorer and so forth. It's a really good time to get involved and get the kids involved with this. This is a real hands-on, share it with the kids, do it with your children. Don't just send your child out to shoot a rocket off, obviously. Go out with them, because I guarantee you, you'll have a good time too. This is a really fun hobby. So come on down to AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey. I'll give you a catalog. I'll show you the starter sets, the different types of rockets, and I guarantee you, once you start this, you'll be hooked. I mean, it's a great hobby. So that's all I have for this week. Next week, I'm thinking about doing molding and casting resin parts. So if you guys have any ideas of things you want to see, please post them to the AAA Facebook page. Come and see us on social media. Facebook, YouTube. We have a great YouTube channel that has a lot of great how-to videos on it. Twitter, Instagram. So come and see us. Come down to the store, AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey. Come see our big new mural that's out in the front of the store. We had the whole front of the store painted with a mural of all the different hobbies that we have in here, and it's beautiful. Really is something to see. So until next week, keep modeling, shoot some rockets off, and I'll see you next Sunday for Facebook Live.